All right, welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I am your host, Brian Call, and today my guest is Mark Livesey, and we are continuing our discussion on e-scouting for elk. And we have covered so far canyons, creeks, and drainages. We did...
well, since we picked up after last year.
Yes, true. So we have a series that's about 5 or 6 episodes, I think, where you and I have sat down and kind of broken down all these different elk strategies and for scouting, e-scouting. And now we're like on part 3 of this second leg of it. Yeah. And we did basically fires and burns.
We did canyon, creeks, and drainages, and we did fires and logging areas.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now we're going to do beetle kill zones, and sparse timber.
For those who haven't been following along, Mark has an e-scouting course that is phenomenal, but you can get a lot of information without buying the course by going to his website and just you got like 50 podcasts, you said?
There's almost 50 now.
50 podcast episodes
don't say
he has where he has been invited to talk about e-scouting. So there's a wealth of information there.
Topic.
And I think it's a great conversation to have, even if you've got the course. You know, it's a little refresher, a little reminder, little tidbits that come from you directly. So anyway, we're going to get into that. We're not going to waste too much time. Let's dive into
beetle kills.
I think you need to move that microphone a little closer.
Okay, how's that?
Yeah.
Okay, better.
Yep.
Okay, so we wrapped up fires and logging areas before, and again, we scratched the surface. That's one of the longest modules. I think it's about an hour and a half long. The video on that one is. This one's about an hour.
Yeah.
For beetle kills, but on beetle kills, they're very similar to fires as far as evaluation techniques, but there are several things that are different and unique when it comes to looking at beetle kills. So first, let's just talk about beetle kills. Do elk like them? Do they don't like? Do they like them? Do they not like them? Whatever. You know, honestly, there's a lot of research on fires, and all of the research indicates that fires are heavy attractants for elk. But the opposite is true of beetle kills. There's a lot of studies being done on beetle kills now because of the prevalence of beetle kill that's happened in the last few years.
Okay. What are beetle kills? Because the definition of beetle kills might be...
I was going to get to that. So what has happened in the West is, and again, this is my layman's perspective on this from what little research I've done, is, you've got these pine bark beetles. You've got all these, there's actually a variety. Everyone thinks when they say beetle kill, it's not all the same beetle. So there's spruce, there's pine, there's different beetles that attack different types of trees. But so when we say beetle kills, it's kind of a broad. So keep that in mind.
Insect though that has come in. So basically,
it's a beetle that comes in and bores a hole in the tree. Mm-hmm. And once they bore enough holes in the tree begins to die.
Right.
And it's kind of a long process. Mm-hmm. So what has happened, I guess, is that the winters over the last decade and longer have become more gentle than they were. And so these gentle winters, from what I understand, are not cold enough and not harsh enough to kill off the beetles. The beetles have always been around, but they basically get killed off every year.
There are a lot of new beetles though, like in the Northwest where we're from. There were a lot of beetles that were imported. That aren't native to the area. And, now they're there.
There's some of that too. So for an example, Colorado, I was looking at a study because Colorado's just been hammered with beetles, in the last decade or more than decade. And the results of that are just now starting to mature, meaning that these beetle kills are beginning to mature. The timber's beginning to fall, and it's getting to be a problem, for elk and elk hunters. So the issue is that once these trees are killed, and remember, it's not like a fire. It's not like beetle kills. You go in and just devastates the whole mountain range. And then the next year, all the trees are dead. It's a slow process. So it's a progression. And that's one of the hard things about e-scouting beetle kills is that learning how to look at beetle kills from a historical perspective. And I hope we'll get into some of that in a second. But for example, in Wyoming, they're claiming now that 20% of of the timber has been affected with beetle kills in Colorado. That's a big number. And so the elk are responding to that in Colorado. It's way different than other places. And we'll get into that as well. In Wyoming, the Medicine Bow National Forest, there's been several studies in there. It's got a pretty expansive beetle kill. The Elkhorn Mountains here in Montana is another area that's been studied extensively for elk use and how elk use beetle kill areas. So those studies, you can Google some of those, or you can access them. I've got them in the course. You can read through them. Again, guys, what's interesting, these are like the elk management reports, okay? These elk management reports for these individual states were not written for hunters. They're written for elk habitat and elk management, but the information in there is gold.
Yeah.
Same thing with these studies. These studies were done on what are we going to do about these forests that are being killed by these beetles and the regeneration and how are the elk browsing and using them. But there's all these little tidbits in these reports. If you're willing to read through some of the minutia, you start getting into these gold nuggets that you're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Or why would elk not use them during the summer, but they're using them during, oh, that makes sense. There's so many little things that I picked up in these studies that I've included in this module that really, to be honest, have opened my eyes even more to beetle kills. I've always been a fan of beetle kills. You know, we talked about this as beetle kills is my number one targeted elk finding feature. Again, I just mentioned before, try not to become one-dimensional. If I'm one-dimensional at all, it's probably beetle kills. And I want to get into some of that. But so beetle kills are, like I said about the research, it's not been very clear on it because there have been some studies that says that beetle kills attract elk, and there's been a few others that say that beetle kill are less attractive to elk. But if you read the fine print, what usually shows up is that what they're usually studying, guys, is mature beetle kills. Okay. They're studying, almost all these studies are studying beetle kills that are 10, 12, 15 years old, where the timber's hitting the ground. And that's a whole different situation than in the early years of a beetle kill. There's not a lot of studies out there that are studying the early stages or the 1 to 5 to 7 year range, of a beetle kill. It's all like, okay, how devastating it is, once the timber starts hitting the ground and they create the fire situations and all the trees become dead and it's like tinder for fires. So, kind of the life cycle of a beetle kill is the beetles start to kill it. It takes 5-7 years to do the process. And then there'll be a wind event, or it takes, a certain number of years, 15 years, maybe for spruce, maybe 10 to 12 for pine. They start hitting the ground and they become matchsticks. And then a fire comes through and burns them out. And then it starts all over again. And, so we haven't seen the completion of that in very many areas because this massive beetle kill situation has not been a thing. There's always been beetle kills around, but the sheer volume is just with the light winters over the last few decades has created this situation we're in.
I'm sure, but I think it's a combination of other factors too, like all the fire suppression efforts that we've gone through as a nation for years and years and years. The firefighting, and then and that's all right. But then when you combine that with the shutdown of logging for environmental issues and so forth, so you're not clear cutting anything at the same time. You're not letting anything burn.
You're right.
You're just waiting for a disaster to happen. And so we have these epic catastrophic events now because we're kind of intervening in nature's process of just lightning strikes, burns down a section, we let it burn, back and forth. You kind of have a natural ebb and flow of forest. But when you stop doing that, then you replace it. Well, we're going to suppress fires, but we're going to cut it. Okay, well, you're kind of doing something similar. It's not quite the same as a burn. But then when you do neither, or when you suppress it, but you don't clear cut, we have these forests that are huge and connected, completely connected. And so you have beetles, I assume, that can just they just kill and just mow through. There's no natural breaks between this forest and that forest where you'd have a burn that's separated and isolated. It's kind of like blacktail and hoof rot. You just have so many blacktail in an area, and without when the density gets that high and you're not harvesting very many, that hoof rot just spreads to every one of them. And until you harvest a lot more and you kill more does and so forth, or you have areas where pockets of animals are isolated from one another, you can insulate against those kind of problems. So I think there's a lot at play, but the point that you're making, and to me, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you have levels of beetle kill that are unprecedented in recent times, but they're still so new that we don't really know where it's going.
The verdict's still out on some of this stuff. And again, guys, it's like fires. I'm not a beetle kill scientist. I'm not a fire expert.
I'm not a forest expert.
I'm just telling you, elk like beetle kills. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's talk about why they like them. So one of the things that again, this is my personal theories. Again, whatever. I mean, the whole course, that's what this is. You're going to have to accept that. And that's just the way it is. So again, when I started looking at where I was killing elk, where I was seeing elk, where I was running into lots of elk, man, I just keep coming back to this fact that, man, it seems to be always around these beetle kill environments. Like there's just beetle kills and a lot of people don't really even realize they're in a beetle kill. And we're going to talk about that. And, because it's such a progression, it depends on the age and depends on, there's so much to talk about in beetle kill when this is a really intense module and it requires a lot of, explanation, but I'm going to only try to hit on some of it. So we mentioned the life cycle of the beetle kill. It takes, so for example, I'm guessing, I'm not guessing, but in general, 10 to 12 years, pine trees with the rooting system, they tend to come down after being dead 10 to 12 years. They're on the ground. Spruce can go a little longer. Their root systems are a little more expansive. So spruce trees can, get into that 15-year range. Now, keep in mind that a wind event or other things can cause this earlier, or if it's in a more protected area, maybe a lot of it can stand up longer. And remember how quickly the beetles can make their way through is going to determine how much is on the ground as well. It's not like a fire. It's not like the beetles come in 1 year and wipe out every tree. It's a progression of and that's why it's sometimes when hunters are trying to identify beetle kill areas, it's subtle. And we're going to talk about that. It's hard to pick them out sometimes when you're e-scouting. Oh, you can pick them out sometimes when you're walking through them. But when you're e-scouting them, sometimes they're really difficult to pick out because of that nature of the sporadicness of the killing, the way the beetles kill the trees. So again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I will. The only way to evaluate beetle kills, the only way is Google Earth Pro, because this is even more important than fires. You have to have access to that historical timeline. It's critical when you want to start figuring out a beetle kill, when it started, what stage it's in, and what the situation is going to be like when you show up on your hunt. There's no other way to do it that I know of, because the date of those images are critical. So when the beetles first infest those trees, what typically happens is, and we'll call it stage 1, the beetles infest the timber, they kill a pretty large stand of trees, and that dying process begins to turn the pine needles brown. So when you're looking at it from Google Earth, okay, you'll start to see these brown canopies or these brown starbursts, I call them. When you're looking down on conifer trees, they look like kind of a starburst, right? They look like a Christmas tree from the top. Obviously, that's what they are. But when those things
a green snowflake.
That's right. When those snowflakes start to look brown or blonde or reddish, what that's telling me is that's beetle kill.
Dead forest.
It's dying forest, not completely dead. Because remember, the beetles kill from the top down. So, well, not always, but a lot of times, like I look at some beetle, I have a few trees at my house that are in the process, and the tops are dying. So you'll see the canopy brown from the aerial photo view. And you'll start to see these dots of browns. There might be a little cluster of brown here, little cluster of brown there, and you'll start to see that. So that's telling you that, okay, that's the date when that beetle kill began. So you look at the date on Google Earth, let's say it was 2015, you're like, okay, now I've got something to work with. It was brown. They were, a lot of the trees were presenting as brown or rust or blonde. in 2015, and now it's 2021. So, you know, I'm 7 years in. There's a good chance this timber's still going to be standing, right? Even though we don't have our image since 2015. We can make some predictions.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's one. So that's stage one. This stage only lasts a couple years. It's incredible how quickly the pine needles will turn brown and fall.
Yeah.
Okay. And then that's when now these stages are my stages, guys.
Yeah,
these are not official science stages. Yeah. Stage 2 for me is the money stage for me. Stage 1 is good. It's allowing some light to come in, and it's allowing the new forage to grow, but it's not as prolific as it's going to be when it hits stage 2. It's just kind of the introduction stage. It still can be a good stage, but stage 2 for me is I'm looking for stage 2 beetle kills most of the time. This is when all the needles have left the canopy, and now those Christmas trees or those snowflakes look gray. Okay. When you start to see the gray snowflake, that's a beetle kill. Okay. A fire will not present like that. Everybody's like, well, how do you tell the difference? Well, I told you how to look at Google Earth and look at that. But let's say you don't have that.
Yeah.
When you're looking down, guys, on a fire, the fire burns off all the limbs.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
They're
sure.
basically straight poles. They do not present as snowflakes.
Yeah.
So when you see the snowflake gray, you're like, that's beetle kill.
Yep.
Okay. So that's a good tip. So when you're looking at the aerial photo and you're seeing all these,
it's pretty telltale too. Once you know what you're looking at.
And I will tell you in Onyx, a little tip in Onyx is Onyx. Now I haven't verified this with Onyx. I'm just assuming they do something to treat their aerial photo images to enhance the images before they bring them into their platform.
Yeah.
They run them through some kind of digital processing. I'm assuming.
Yeah.
And the beetle kills look purplish. So guys, when you're looking at and you see this gray purplish, you're like, oh, that's beetle kill. Gaia doesn't do that. I've never seen it in Onyx. I mean, I've never seen it go on any of the other
Google.
It's only Onyx that I've seen the purplish color. So anyway, that's a good little tip too. So now, once all the pine needles have left, this triggers this massive growth of vegetation underneath because now the sun can get down. So what I like about this is think about what we've got here. Now we've got tree canopy. Remember, still have the limbs, still have the branches, just no pine needles. So there's a filter of light. So there's a lot of light coming in, but not too much light. So think about when we talked about the burns on the edge. So when we talked about the edge environments in a burn, the reason there's so much vegetation growing on the edge is because of the mix of shade and sunlight. Now in this beetle kill situation, we've got the best of both worlds. The entire area is mixed of shade. We've got some shade, but we've got a lot of sun. So now we get massive growth in these beetle kills. I've gone through beetle kills that's just waist deep in forbs and grass. And the moisture content improves.
Yeah, because those trees aren't.
They're not competing for
giant trees.
So we've got these big trees that are still standing that are not sucking the life out of the earth.
Yeah.
So what happens? Everything starts growing. So it's a really great situation for elk. And I find this in that range of that 2 to 8 years. When I can look at Google Earth and I can look back and find the brown. So, okay, so let's back up. Let's say you're looking at Google Earth and you see an area with a whole bunch of these gray snowflakes. And you're like, okay, that's beetle kill. Well, how old is it? What do? You go up to the historical timeline slider and you start paging back year after to the earliest image that you can find that shows the brown. And let's say you're looking at it 2015, okay? You got a 2015 image, it's all gray. You're like, okay. So I start paging back and then I see 2009. I see, now remember, as you go back in Google Earth, the image quality gets worse and worse because the cameras have just gotten better and better.
Yeah.
But you can still see the brown, okay? You just got to look a little closer, zoom in a little more. But you can see, in 2009, this started turning brown. And you click back to 2007, it's green, right? So you're like, okay, I know that beetle kill started approximately
around 2009.
Right. And I'm looking at 2015. So we've got, okay, what is that? 9, 10, 11, 12, 5, 8 years. Okay. Ooh, I'm looking at an 8-year-old beetle kill. Now it's 2021. Ooh, I'm probably not going to go there.
Okay.
Because we're looking at a 20-year-old beetle kill.
Yeah.
And even though in Google Earth, the trees look like they're standing, remember that's a 2015 image.
Yeah.
Now we got trees on the ground.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, and it seems to happen all at once.
Yes. And well, I don't know. Well, a wind event can
You know
do
what I
it
mean?
for sure.
Like it takes one heavy wind and all of a sudden everything is on the ground.
So now there's way more to it than that, guys. And I go through that pretty detailed in the course on how to really break that down. I just want to introduce you to the thought process of how to go back and how to evaluate.
Yep.
So stage 2 is the range that I like to hunt in that 2 to 8 year old range. Stage 3, guys, is when the timber starts to hit the ground. Mm-hmm. It's just beginning to hit the ground. This is where the elk still like it. But this is where I find that elk don't spend the entire year there. Most of the research is showing that elk, when the timber starts hitting the ground, they tend to avoid it during non-hunting seasons. Okay, this is an important concept. If you read the research, a lot of the research says that when the beetle kill starts hitting the ground in a significant amount, it becomes less desirable to the elk during non-hunting seasons.
Yeah.
Or non-pressured times.
I was going to say, like, I would imagine all that downfall
just makes it difficult for them. Why would they navigate that when they don't have to?
But when the pressure hits,
that's where they go.
Yeah.
Because why do they go there? Because hunters aren't going there. So this is an interesting.
Also, wolves and other animals.
That's right. They don't like it either.
No.
So in Colorado, guys, I talked about this on the Rich Outdoors podcast, and he brought it up, and I've looked into it a lot more. There are giant herds of elk in Colorado that are living year-round in wide open beetle kills. Like the timber's already on the ground, and they've developed these networks of networks of transportation. They know where they can go and how they can get around, and they just live out there. And the reason they're living out there is, I think, 2 reasons. One, the beetle kill situation there is so massive that they've had to adapt, number one. Number 2 is pressure. They figured out that this is I can stay here year-round. Oh, and what I mean by that, when I say year-round, they're not migrating in Colorado no longer in these areas because the beetle kill has created the situation where now that these beetle kills are old, the browse is growing up, the woody plants, so they can actually feed themselves through the winter in these beetle kills. So they don't have to go down to the gauntlet of hunters. Yeah. And now I'm not saying in all places, but more and more reports in Colorado are showing that these herds have adapted. So think about that. I talk a lot about this in the course. Elk, they seek out thermal protection, okay? They don't like to be in the direct sun all the time. But what are we seeing? We just talked about this in Idaho when we were bear hunting. We're seeing elk in the open more and more and more on these steep slopes. That's because the wolves are keeping them there.
Yep.
Well, in beetle kill in Colorado, the sheer hunting pressure, in the future it's going to be wolves as well. But elk are adapting to the thermal protections. They're foregoing the shade for security. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of a new concept for elk. Not new, but I mean over decades of
lesser of two evils.
That's right. So stage 3 is where the timber is starting to hit the ground. The elk are using it, but they're not using it as much as they did stage 2. And this is not always the case, guys. It's not a rule. It's just an odds thing for me. But stage 4 is when these trees become almost impenetrable. We've all seen, it's like matchsticks. You look at Google Earth and it's just like, mm-hmm. And, and when it reaches this point, the research has been pretty consistent is, the elk tend to stay away from these areas more and more during non-hunting seasons, but during rifle seasons and during high pressure seasons, and sometimes I wouldn't consider archery seasons high pressure in most areas, even though there's a lot of people out there.
Yeah.
But rifle season is a whole new dynamic for elk. But when you get a lot of rifle hunters and the pressure is intense during rifle season, they're finding that they're seeking these beetle kills out.
Dude, I've been in areas with intense downfall, and during rifle season, all the elk go there because a dude with a horse cannot get in there to get the animal out.
Yep.
So that eliminates all packers from hunting right there. And if the burn is a little bit with this big downfall is a little further from everywhere else, a lot of hunters won't hike back there. And then even a hunter that kills a big giant bull in that spot, they'd have to climb with their pack on and pack the meat out of that downfall nightmare. But it's absolutely true. We killed a lot of big bulls in that stuff because no one else was willing to do it. And that's where they hole up when the pressure hits.
Yeah. And so think about beetle kills too, guys, is that there's not the network of roads. There's not the fire suppression roads. Now they'll log beetle kills eventually, but not a lot because remember, a burn happens and it's over. And then the next year they can come in and they can log the trees and still salvage them, right?
Yep.
But in beetle kills, it's such a slow process. By the time they want to start logging them, sometimes they're not worth it. They're dried and they're, whatever. Yep. So sometimes these beetle kills, I think one of the other reasons they're so attractive to elk is that there's not a lot of access to them a lot of times.
Yes.
There's not roads going to them.
Right.
There's not necessarily trails going to them. So what I'm saying is it pays off, guys, to use your Google Earth at its highest resolutions. Zoom out, set back, look at your landscape, study the color of the timber. Where do you see the gray patches? Where do you see the blue-gray? We're going to talk about that in a minute. The blue-green is usually an aspen type of situation. It's a deciduous tree. When you see that dark green or that olive color, those are conifer trees most of the time. Now, I've not gotten good enough that I can tell all the different trees, the conifer trees, but what I can tell is I can look at any area and tell you beetle kills, fires, aspen patches, conifer patches. I can tell you all that. I can give you ideas on sparse timber. We're going to talk about that. But just if you don't look at it in the big picture, sometimes you'll miss it.
Yeah.
Because it's subtle. And so I start looking for these patterns of these gray patches. I'm like, oh, look at this here. We got some gray trees. And when I start seeing gray trees, I immediately start scrolling back with the historical image. I want to know when it started. How old is it? Is it 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 10 years? If I see in that 2 to 8 years, I'm like, I get excited about it. And I'm like, I know the light's hitting the ground there. And then I start looking for other features. North slopes, canyons, the drainages, all the things we've been talking about. When I can find those in relation to a beetle kill, benches that are up in oh man, those things are starting to add up to a elk hunting mecca. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I like about beetle kills as well, another thing I like about beetle kills is the elk are comfortable in beetle kills at all times of the day. So you think about a fire and the more openness of it, you'll see elk moving in and out of fires at those prime time hours, right? Mm-hmm. The hour after daylight to the hour before dark. Mm-hmm. And you got to be in the right place at the right time. Right. Now, that's true of elk in general, but I have found that elk will use beetle kills during the middle of the day. They'll get there early. They'll stay late. They'll be slow to get to their bedding areas because they've got this security around them still.
Right.
There's still enough trees. So I feel like you can call
burn
them
puts
in.
it to a 2-inch, or 2 foot base. But it seems like in an area like that, you're still going to have stuff shoulder high and over your head.
Oh, yeah. Well, they're still fully standing and they're fully branched.
Yeah.
So remember, you've got shade. You've got thermal protection for the elk. You've got massive feed and you've got security and the nature. Remember, the nature of the beetle kill is they don't wipe out all the forest at once. So there's still bedding areas. There's still denser.
Yeah. It's not such a.
It's a smorgasbord of timber densities.
It's not a monolithic.
That's right.
Like forest,
like a burn can be. Mm-hmm. So I feel like sometimes the callability of elk is primo in burn and beetle kills. Mm. They're comfortable coming into calls. Sometimes
Mark sneaking in without calling at all.
It's quiet because you got new growth.
Yeah,
you're stealthier in cover. There, but you got cover. One of the other things I like about we're talking about all these things we like about beetle kills, but so we like the fact that They're secure in there. They move around during shooting hours better. I think they're more callable in these areas. I think they like to rut in these areas. I think when you get on the Beetle, when you get in these more wide open burns, guys, the elk are very difficult to call.
Yeah.
In those open areas, if they can't see you, they're not coming.
In open country where I like to hunt elk the most,
it's brutal.
It's the same situation. It's not really conducive to calling because all they have to do is take a peek at where you're at, and if they don't see elk right there, they're like, I'm out.
So, there's a lot more to beetle kills, but that's what I wanted to leave you with this. So before we wrap up, let's talk a minute about sparse timber, because as elk adapt to wolves, we've been talking about last couple, as they adapt to more hunting pressure, I'm seeing more and more elk in what I call sparse timber, meaning not necessarily beetle kill, but timber that is open enough that you can see the ground.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at Google Earth, okay, and you're scanning and you see these dark north timber slopes, and it's just, you can't see the ground at all. It's just dark timber. Okay. You're like, okay, that looks good for bedding areas. That looks good for coolness. That looks good for shade, but not offering a lot of feeding opportunities, right? And then I'm looking down the ridge a little bit, and that timber, that north slope, still the same north slope, all of a sudden, you start to be able to see the ground in the timber.
Yeah.
Man, I am seeing more and more elk in these sparser timber for the same reason beetle kill. Light's starting to penetrate. But the elk in these types of areas are incredibly difficult to hunt because you can't glass them. You can't from in a lot of perspectives. So what you have to do on the sparse timber is you have to start looking at your glassing spots in relation to the steepness of this terrain, because sparse timber is hard to look into, guys, if the steepness is not steep enough. I hope I explained that right. The more gentle the terrain, okay. So if you're looking at a slope and you're looking across, if it's vertical, let's just say vertical, you can see well.
Yeah.
But the more it levels out, the trees block the view.
Yeah.
So this is where we talked about using that tool in Google Earth where you can do the 3D tilt. You want to tilt it in Google Earth from your glassing spot from 6 feet off the ground. You want to tilt it. You want to look into that sparse timber and you want to say, can I see the ground? If you can, then when you get to that glassing spot, it's money. But if you don't do that and you look
That's genius, Mark.
If you look from an aerial photo view, okay, and you see, oh, look at all this sparse timber, I'm going to go to his spot. I'm going to glass that. Well, let's say it's a 8-degree slope. You're not going to glass nothing. Right. You're going to think you can. Right. Because you're looking overhead, you can see. So keep that in mind. I know that I may not presented that quite right, but think about when you glass into beetle kills and sparse timber, it has to be from a certain angle. And I don't know what that angle is. I need to do more research on what is that degree, but here's how I can tell you how to test it. Go to Google Earth, set up your glassing situation from the height that you're going to be at, guys, not overhead, not 1,000 feet up, 6 feet off the ground from that ridge, and tilt it from just like you're looking at it from your spot, and you'll be able to see if you can see or not. And if you can, when you get there what you're dealing with. Yeah. Because, guys, there's nothing worse. How many times have you walked to a glassing spot, Brian, you get there and you're like, oh, dang, this ain't what I thought it was.
It's the worst. Oh, it's the worst, especially when you hike like 7 miles into someplace and you get there and you're like, this isn't huntable.
Guys, this
isn't glassable. Like, there's so many areas that are more conducive. And some of the places we get ourselves into, it's like, crap. To leave this place, it's going to be a 4-mile jaunt to the next place. Yeah. And you can waste a day, 2 days, 3 days because you keep going to these places that don't pan out until you get there.
Well, so let's just use your scenario. So let's say you and Ryan are kind of, you're known for this don't quit anyway, but let's just say, you've gotten soft now. You guys are with llamas and things are changing. You're getting older. Yeah. We spent an hour before this podcast talking about how you're going to get llamas. Yeah. So let's say you go to glassing spot number 1, Brian, that you picked out.
Yeah.
And you get there and you can't see worth a crap. It's just not what you thought.
Yeah.
You're like, dang it, we got to go to glassing spot number 2. How excited are you about number 2 when you already know number 1 sucks? You're worried, right?
Yeah.
You're like, we're going to get there and it could be the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But when you test these spots, guys, when you use the techniques that I talk about in the glassing module, which we haven't even got to yet, when you test and proof, I call it ground proofing. When you ground proof your glassing spot and you get to number 1 and it's exactly what you thought it was going to be, number 2 is a lot easier to hike to, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to go to a spot, guys, when the first spot was not what you thought.
Right.
Because you don't have any reliability that spot number 2 is going to be any better. You're just almost blind faithing it at that point.
Yeah.
Now, once you get a lot of experience, guys, and you've got a lot of, I know guys are saying, well, I can look at a spot and I can tell. Yeah, I get you. You kind of can, but you can't.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm talking about is, especially in coulee country, when you're out like eastern Montana, you're hunting mule deer or whatever. I know you guys hunt out, in some coulee country. You had some videos this year with Paley. That's where the glassing testing is really important because you got all kinds of ridges that are coming in from all different angles. You got some that are just this much roller and you're at this elevation and this hill rolls up like this. Can you really see over the top of that to the next one or can you not? Mm-hmm. Very difficult to look at a pure topographic map.
It looks flat.
Exactly.
It looks flat and you're like, I can't see anything.
When you look at only topography, the lines, all these contour lines, it's very difficult to say, what can I see from here?
Yeah, and if you have a place that's like that, sometimes all it takes is
one little
hill that's like 20 feet taller than the rest.
That's right.
And all of a sudden,
it's blocking the whole view.
Or it opened up a view. Like, oh my gosh, like, half a mile. This is where I plan to glass from. If I go half a mile this way, all of a sudden I see everything. And you figure that out before you get there. You can't even tell when you're on the ground how that's going to work out.
On the ground's even worse.
Yeah.
In my opinion. So here's an example. I know this isn't what this is about, but this is important because
they tie
SPARCE,
together.
timber, and they tie together. So let's take a typical ridge. Let's say that ridge is 2 miles long. Mm-hmm. What I do is I look for all the open spots on that ridge. Don't forget this, guys. You can't glass on a ridge that's covered with timber. You've got to have an opening.
I know.
So you're looking for those openings, okay? So I'll mark all of the reasonable openings all the way down.
I also look for trees that I can climb 30, 40 feet up.
Yeah, well.
But, that's for the not faint of heart.
I do not look for that, guys. I'm 55 years old.
I'll tell you, I've killed so many animals because I'll climb 30 feet into a tree, into this terrain you're talking about, and all of a sudden I can see the whole thing, and I'm like, there's elk there, there's elk there, there's elk. And nobody will climb a tree.
Let's just go. I do not recommend that in the backcountry. 5 miles in the truck with a little bitty first aid kit and no safety.
I don't either.
We're not endorsing that. But so back to reality. So in the real world, you'll go down this ridge and you identify these open spots. Okay, well, which one of those is the best? Mm-hmm. Which one? Is it the end one? Maybe not. Is it this one, this one, this one? Well, what are you going to do? You've got one day you want to do that ridge. Are you really going to try to hit all of them? Okay, let's just say you get out to, you're going to try to hit them all. You hit the first one at prime time in the morning, in the dark. By the time you get to the end one, it's freaking noon. Mm-hmm. And that's your best one. You've lost your ability to glass during the prime time, right? Because you didn't know which one of these is the best off the bat. If you ground proof those all, what I do is I run ground proofing, the technique that I do, and I print it out. I run the ground proofing and I print it. Run the ground proofing and print it onto my printer. And then I lay them out on the table. Which one can I see the most from? Which one can I see where I want to see? And which one can I see the most from? And I will usually start with that one. I might go to the other ones. Mm-hmm. But guys, when you're at your best spot first, what happens? Your odds are increased.
Yeah.
If you start with your worst one first, your odds are decreased. I know,
every hour they start to move into the timber,
I know
disappear,
that's subtle,
hide.
But guys, that process, I know that sounds like a lot. It takes literally, once you know how to do it, you're talking about in 5 minutes, you can analyze that whole ridge and proof every spot. And then hey, out on the end isn't as good as this one.
Yeah.
Because everybody wants to run out to the farthest one. That's kind of the human nature.
Right.
But it might not be the best one.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just wanted to throw that in. So Beetle kills, sparse timber, they're very similar. The glassing is a really delicate part of that. The aging of the Beetle kills is a really important factor in that. I hope you picked up on that. In the course, we talk about this in great detail because this was one of my favorite modules that I did. I think this is the longest module because I spent the most time because I really dug into the research. If you really want to geek out on Beetle kills, this is the module for you. But so that probably wraps that one up.
No, that's awesome. Folks, Mark, they can get a hold of the course if they want to go deeper on Treeline Academy. Is it treelineacademy.com?
Treelineacademy.net.
.net. We have links in the description fields of the podcast videos as well on our YouTube channel. If you go to briancall.com, you can find all the videos there too, and they link back to YouTube. But and you use the code GRITTY, you get a discount. The class is basically $100 if you use the code.
Right.
$99.
One thing, before we move on, one thing I wanted to point out here is, guys, I know we're telling you all about the course, and it's great. I mean, take it if you want. But, like Brian's been saying, all these podcasts exist. So everyone's like, well, why would I do the course when you got all these podcasts and you talk about some of the things at least? And I'm like, well, that's true. But I do believe in an educational knowledge environment that structure is important. When you listen to a podcast, you get kind of random pieces. We'll talk about this for a minute. We'll talk about that for a minute. There's not a lot of structure. It's kind of a conversation. It's exploratory.
It has its value.
Exactly. It gives you an overview, broad spectrum. But in this course, it's very methodical. It's in order. It's module chapter driven. It's got all the text that matches the video. It's searchable by keywords. There's some factors that I want to make sure people understand that are there that are not in a podcast.
For sure, because there's visuals too. Like, I want to see you look it up on a map.
Do the examples.
I want to see you show me the purplish haze of the trees, what the snowflake top looks like. Those things help me to see it, and we don't have time to do that on a podcast like this. It's already detailed in the course.
That's a good point.
So,
good point.
I think a lot of people are visual like that, and it's really useful to absorb it that way. But everybody's on a different budget too.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
If it doesn't work, there's all those free podcasts out there on your website too, some 50 or so. There's a whole bunch under the Gritty. I'm putting a playlist together of all the ones I've done with Mark, so you can just go to the Gritty YouTube channel and you'll find a playlist of all of Mark's podcast episodes that we've done together right there. So valuable stuff. Check out Mark at Treeline Pursuits on Instagram, and you can get a little llama info as well as the.
We're gonna have to do some llama podcast. You guys got
me.
Now we've been talking to your brother and llama. Now you got me all excited about llamas. I just had a baby llama day before yesterday. My first one of the year. I'm hope to have about 10 this year.
Solid white. Is it going to develop some colors, or is it just white?
He's got a brown tail. And he's got a little brown patch on his eye. But you remember Maverick from the hunt. He was like the super athletic one.
Yeah.
It's his son.
Yeah, that's the llama I want right there. That llama was a cut above the rest.
Yeah, this is his baby boy, so I'm excited about it.
That's super cool. So anyway, folks, thanks for tuning in. And as always, stay gritty.